The moment Ethan walked into our house, my world shifted. I didn't know it at the time, but his arrival would change everything I thought I knew about myself, my marriage, and the life Tom and I had built. It wasn't love at first sight, not in the way people describe in those overly sentimental novels, but there was something about him that caught my attention and refused to let go. Tom and I had been married for 10 years. 10 long years. At first, our marriage was perfect, or so I thought, but over time the spark faded. Tom threw himself into his career, chasing promotions and long hours, leaving little time for us. I became a routine part of his life, the wife who kept the house running, the woman he greeted with a distracted peck on the cheek before disappearing behind his laptop for the night. Then Ethan showed up. He was 20, fresh out of college, and full of that youthful confidence that seemed to radiate from his every move. Ethan wasn't just Tom's younger brother. He was his polar opposite. Where Tom was reserved and serious, Ethan was charming and carefree. And his physique. Ethan looked like he had stepped off the cover of some fitness magazine. Broad shoulders, toned arms, and a smile that could disarm even the coldest heart. He arrived with a single suitcase, saying he wanted to spend the summer with us before starting a job in another state. Tom welcomed him with open arms, happy to have family around. I told myself I was happy too. After all, what harm could a summer visit do? But it started almost immediately. Ethan wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic. Every word he spoke seemed designed to draw you in. At first I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the energy of someone so young, someone who hadn't yet been worn down by the weight of life. But then there were the moments. The way his eyes lingered a second too long when we talked, the compliments he gave. Small things at first, like noticing my new haircut or telling me I looked nice in a dress Tom hadn't even acknowledged. And then there was the way he offered to help around the house, carrying groceries, fixing the squeaky kitchen cabinet, even washing dishes, all with that charming smile that made my heart race in ways it hadn't in years. I told myself it was harmless. A little attention from someone younger, someone more attentive, wasn't a crime. But deep down I knew better. One afternoon, Ethan and I were in the backyard. Tom was at work as usual, and Ethan had insisted on helping me trim the rose bushes. As we worked side by side, his arm brushed against mine, sending a jolt of electricity through me. I glanced at him, and for a split second, our eyes met in a way that felt dangerous. "Thanks for letting me stay here," he said. His voice low and sincere. "It means a lot." Of course, I replied, trying to sound casual, but my heart was racing, and I couldn't stop myself from noticing the way the sunlight highlighted the angles of his face, the way his t-shirt clung to his chest. That night, as I lay in bed next to Tom, I couldn't stop thinking about Ethan. It wasn't just his looks, it was the way he made me feel. Seen, desired, alive. Days turned into weeks, and the tension between Ethan and me grew. It was in the stolen glances across the dinner table, the accidental touches as we passed each other in the hallway, the way his smile lingered just a little too long. I told myself it was all in my head, that I was reading into things that weren't there. But the truth was, I didn't want it to stop. The guilt began to creep in, but I pushed it aside, telling myself that Tom's neglect was the real problem. If he couldn't make time for me, then why shouldn't I enjoy a little attention from someone who did? As the summer days stretched on, I felt myself slipping further into a dangerous game, one I wasn't sure I wanted to stop playing. If you're drawn into this tale of passion, betrayal, and forbidden love, like and subscribe for more gripping stories that dive deep into the complexities of human relationships. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop myself. Ethan's presence in our home had awakened something in me that I hadn't felt in years. Something I didn't even know I was missing. The tension between us was undeniable, like a live wire humming beneath the surface, waiting to snap. Tom was oblivious as always. Work had consumed him to the point where he barely noticed anything outside of his laptop and conference calls. He didn't notice the way Ethan and I exchanged fleeting glances, didn't hear the laughter we shared over inside jokes, and didn't question why I suddenly seemed more lively. The night it all changed was one of those sticky, humid summer evenings. Tom had left for a business trip, leaving Ethan and me alone in the house. I had planned to spend the evening catching up on laundry and watching mindless TV, but Ethan had other plans. "Why don't we watch a movie?" he suggested, leaning against the kitchen counter with that easy, confident smile of his. "You deserve a break." I hesitated, but the thought of spending time with him was too tempting to pass up. "Sure," I said, trying to sound casual. We ended up in the living room, a bowl of popcorn between us and some forgettable action movie playing on the screen. First, it was innocent. We laughed at the cheesy dialogue and exchanged harmless comments about the characters. But as the night went on, the space between us on the couch seemed to shrink. Then it happened, a quiet moment in the movie, and I felt Ethan's hand brush against mine. My breath hitched, and I glanced at him. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The air between us was charged, heavy with unspoken words and unacknowledged feelings. "I shouldn't," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Why not?" he asked, his voice low and steady. "I see the way you look at me. I feel it too." Before I could talk myself out of it, he leaned in. His lips brushed against mine, tentative at first, as if giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, a wave of adrenaline and desire washing over me. The kiss deepened, and for the first time in years I felt alive. It was intoxicating, the way he made me feel wanted, cherished, and seen. But as the moment ended and we pulled away, reality came crashing back. "What are we doing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at me, his expression a mix of guilt and longing. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I don't want to stop." Neither did I. Over the next few weeks, our affair became a dangerous dance. We were careful, or at least we thought we were. We stole moments when Tom was out, exchanged secret texts, and shared fleeting touches when no one was looking. But with every passing day, the guilt grew. I told myself that Tom's neglect justified my actions, that I deserved to feel loved and desired. But deep down I knew I was lying to myself. One evening, as Ethan and I sat in the backyard watching the sunset, he turned to me, his expression serious. "This isn't fair to Tom," he said. "He's my brother. We need to stop." I felt a pang of panic. The thought of losing Ethan was unbearable, but I couldn't ignore the truth in his words. "I know," I said, my voice trembling, "but I don't know how to let go." We sat in silence, the weight of our choices pressing down on us. The thing about secrets is that they don't stay buried for long. As careful as Ethan and I tried to be, cracks began to form. Suspicion, guilt, and paranoia crept into every corner of my life, like a shadow I couldn't escape. Tom wasn't blind, he was just busy. But even his distracted nature couldn't ignore the tension that had settled in our house. It started small. The way Ethan avoided being in the same room with him for too long, or how I would suddenly find excuses to leave whenever the three of us were together. One night, over dinner, Tom finally voiced his thoughts. "Is everything okay with you two?" he asked, his eyes darting between us. The fork in my hand froze midair, and I forced a laugh, hoping to mask the panic rising in my chest. "Course. Why would you ask that?" Tom shrugged, but his gaze lingered on Ethan, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Just feels off, that's all." Ethan mumbled something about being tired and excused himself from the table. I followed him with my eyes as he disappeared down the hallway, my heart pounding. Tom's suspicion was a crack in the dam, and I knew it wouldn't take much more for it to break wide open. The real unraveling began a week later. Ethan had started to pull away, clearly struggling with the weight of our affair. He avoided me whenever he could, and when we did speak, his words were clipped, his tone distant. "We have to stop," he said one afternoon when we were alone in the kitchen. "I can't do this anymore." His words hit me like a slap. "Ethan, please." "No," he interrupted, his voice firm. "This isn't just about us. This is about Tom. He's my brother. I can't keep betraying him like this." I wanted to argue, to tell him that what we had was worth the risk, but the truth was, I couldn't deny the guilt eating away at me. But before we could make any decisions, fate made them for us. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Tom had decided to work from home, a rare occurrence that should have put me on high alert. I was in the living room, scrolling through my phone when I heard his voice. "Hey, what's this?" My stomach dropped. I turned to see Tom standing at the kitchen counter, holding my phone. My heart raced as I realized what he had found. A text message from Ethan, one I hadn't bothered to delete. "Miss you. We need to talk." Tom read the message aloud, his voice cold and steady. He looked up at me, his eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My silence was answer enough. "Is this about Ethan?" he asked, his voice rising. Are you too?" Before I could stop him, he stormed out of the room, calling for Ethan. The confrontation was inevitable, and it was brutal. "What the hell is going on here?" Tom demanded as he cornered Ethan in the backyard. "Tell me the truth." Ethan's face went pale, and for a moment I thought he might lie. But then his shoulders sagged, and he looked at Tom with a mix of shame and regret. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Tom's eyes widened, and then he turned to me. "How long?" he asked, his voice trembling. How long?" he shouted, his face red with anger. 2 months, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The look on his face broke me. It was a mix of betrayal, heartbreak, and fury. "You disgust me," he spat before storming back into the house. Ethan and I stood in silence, the weight of our choices crushing down on us. That night, Tom packed a bag and left without saying another word. Ethan, unable to face his brother or the aftermath of our betrayal, followed soon after. And just like that, everything fell apart. The silence in the house after they both left was suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind against the windows, felt like a reprimand. I was alone in the mess I had created, left to confront the ruins of my marriage and the betrayal that had torn our family apart. I spent the first few days in denial, waiting for Tom to return. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would come back and we could talk it out. But the silence from him was deafening. No calls, no texts, nothing. Ethan too had vanished. I reached out to him once, desperate for some kind of reassurance, but he didn't pick up. I couldn't blame him. We had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and the weight of our actions was too much for either of us to bear. It was a week later when Tom finally reached out. I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway, and my heart leaped with both hope and dread. I opened the door before he could knock, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold and detached. We sat in the living room, the same room where Ethan and I had shared so many stolen moments. Tom didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Why?" he asked, his eyes piercing mine. "Why did you do it?" I took a deep breath, tears already spilling down my cheeks. "I don't know, Tom. I was lonely. I felt invisible. And Ethan, he made me feel seen." "That's not an excuse," he snapped, his voice rising. "I worked my ass off for this family, and this is how you repay me." "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." His laughter was bitter. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything. Do you even realize what you've done?" I nodded, unable to speak. The divorce papers came a month later. Tom didn't want to talk anymore. He didn't want to try counseling or even attempt to salvage the wreckage. He wanted out, and I couldn't blame him. Ethan remained a ghost. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had moved to another state, trying to start over. Part of me wanted to reach out, but I knew it would only make things worse. The months that followed were a blur of regret and self-reflection. I moved into a small apartment, far from the house that held too many memories. Nights were the hardest, filled with the echoes of what could have been and the sting of what was lost. One day, as I was packing away old photos, I came across a picture of the three of us, Tom, Ethan, and me, at a family barbecue. We were all smiling, happy, and carefree. I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, tears streaming down my face. How had we gone from that to this? Now, a year later, I'm still picking up the pieces. I've learned to live with the consequences of my actions, though the guilt never truly fades. I've started therapy, trying to understand why I made the choices I did and how to become a better version of myself. Tom has moved on, or so I hear. He's dating someone new, a woman who seems kind and grounded. I wish him happiness, even if it's without me. As for Ethan, I don't know if I'll ever see him again. Part of me hopes I don't. It's better this way, for both of us. Life goes on as it always does. I've learned the hard way that choices have consequences, and some mistakes can't be undone. But I've also learned that forgiveness, especially of oneself, is a journey worth taking.